Welcome everyone to Politically High Tech with your host Elias. I have a new guest here, and we're going to talk about something that's very important. And you've heard this before, especially in the past, last year to be particular. USAID, especially the current president, he's done massive cuts, virtually eliminating it. Probably a little dramatic, but we have an expert here that's going to debunk whatever dramatic claims I make here or correct me. I'm fine with it. I don't care. I'm just a host bringing this conversation to you. That's all I am. Just a guy shouting at the mic, giving my opinions. That's all I have to you, all right? So before we do the little introduction, audience, listeners, viewers, in your head, don't embarrass yourself in the comments unless you think you're arrogant, you think you're better than God. Put down in the chat what you think USAID really means. Do you know what it is? TikTok, insert cricket sounds. Well, we're going to learn about it. If you're shy, this benefits you. Don't answer it. But yeah, we're going to learn about that because for me, it was foreign aid that was helping mostly underprivileged nations. That's my understanding of it. But we can have a much more enriched understanding of what the USAID is. And Trump gutted it last year. Yep. That's how far back it goes. And why is this not such a good thing? Or for some of you who disagree, why is this such a good thing if you want to be a contrarian? Why do you think USAID is a waste of money? And then for those of you who are proponents, why it is such a good thing? That's something to think about, okay? That's your little comment section activity if you want to do that. So let me introduce the guest here. All right. And he's very, very, he's very involved with the USAID. Okay. Look, he gave up his great career, okay, as a partner. That's a big deal. At Beverly Hills commercial law firm. His dream home over the ocean and pursue what has become nearly 3-decade journey of foreign aid, both as a legal advisor and then a senior manager. He has done work in multiple nations, Haiti, Honduras, Nicaragua, Kazakhstan, and Guinea. And he has firsthand view of dilemmas that USAID lawyers had to deal with. Okay. And the difficulties persuade farms to grow. Goodness. I would have struggled with that. Cocoa instead of coca. I don't know how you persuaded that me. I would have been frustrated if I would have knocked the guy out. In a bureaucratic rain dance that required you to start new programs that provide an enlightening overview of the world of what is international foreign aid. As he put it, at a time when spirituality is at an all-time low in human history, foreign aid, and reflects our quote-unquote better angels, the tragedy of USAID's sudden destruction will impact the entire world for years. So, based on his extensive background, he has a heck of a lot of knowledge. So, if I was you, instead of just challenging and disagreeing with him just because you can, keyboard warriors, listen, okay? He has a lot of experience. He's dealt with it firsthand. At least give a listen, give it a try. If you have skepticism, fine, but don't be so obnoxious about it. Don't dismiss his 27 plus year of experience. All right, I know some of you you're wrong, you're this. Listen, a lot of you don't experience you got is just shouting at Reddit. Okay, that's not very valuable. Anyways, let's welcome Clifford Brown. Okay, Clifford H. Brown. Okay. And what do you want the listeners and the viewers to know about you before we get started?
Well, first of all, thank you, Elias. I look forward to the conversation. I'm 77. I've been married twice. I got 5 kids. I live in Maryland. That's a little bit of it. I grew up in Washington State, and I followed a girlfriend to Los Angeles years ago and went to law school and got a job as a commercial lawyer there. They bought me off every year. I wasn't really thrilled with the kind of work I was doing. I felt like I sometimes was a mental prostitute. I had to sell my mind to think about somebody else's problem. But I did get involved in a very big case toward the end of my career. It was a big commercial bankruptcy, and I was representing the employees that got hammered by the bankruptcy. It was Continental Airlines when they went bankrupt in 1984. And that case just consumed me for about 3 years, and it kept me in the business longer than I probably otherwise would have stayed in it. But when that case ended, I had time on my hands. I mean, so much of it was in Houston. I was flying back and forth to Houston. I did 31 trips one year. And when it was over, I had my feet on the desk, and I was looking at the Wall Street Journal, and I saw an ad. They wanted attorneys that had another language. And I thought, that sounds interesting. I spoke Spanish because I spent a year down there in Latin America right after college. I had won a fellowship to travel in Latin America, and I lived with my cousin's future father-in-law in Chile, Valparaiso, Chile, during the time of Salvador Allende. And I was there 9 months and enrolled in a business school for a while. Anyway, when I was using Spanish, and when you learn another language and you use it daily and you really get into it, it's almost like you grew another soul. And it's an experience I just can't get enough of. I've been doing it ever since, trying to study other languages. But when that job opportunity presented itself, I flew back to DC. I interviewed with the guys they were in the State Department then. It's a separate agency, but at the time they were co-located. And I saw a big map on the wall, and they had little red pins all over the world. And I said, what are those pins? He says, that's where our attorneys are. And something in me changed. I said, I got to get this job. So that's the very short version. I wrote a book describing a much longer tale called Dilettante, because after I got in the agency, I was dabbling in thousands of different subjects. But we can get into that later as to why that was true. USAID did so many different things, and it was, I won't say that I did it for humanitarian reasons. I did it because I thought it was going to be fun, and it was. It was great fun. There were some very dangerous moments also. My wife got kidnapped at one point. I have friends that got killed in the course of their work. And a lot of people got very sick in the places we had to live. The USAID only works or worked in very poor places, third world countries. So, the living conditions sometimes could be quite challenging. But at the same time, it was a colonial existence. When I got to Nairobi, we had a housekeeper, a live-in housekeeper, and a cook, and a driver, and a gardener, and we had all the local holidays and the American holidays, and home leave, and R&R, and I didn't have to think about the work when I came home at night. So we did a lot of traveling and everywhere we lived, and it was fun. And that it was adventurous, never boring. The downside was I never put down roots. That's what I look back up on with some regret now. I don't have the roots that a lot of people do. If you stay in one place for your whole career, and then you have a support system and whatnot. But I find myself now, even though I'm near Washington, D.C., a lot of retired USAID people are around here, but it's not the same as if I had been working here all that time.
I was going to say this before we continue the conversation. I think we need to define what is USAID, because last year was such a buzzword because the media was talking about it, how Trump gutted it. Can you give us just a basic, like a definition for dummies kind of style?
Yeah.
of what
Well, it was originally, people just called it AID, and that was a cute pun. What it stood for was the Agency for International Development, and they did that deliberately because obviously they can fold it into the word foreign aid, but that's not what the AID stood for. It was an acronym, Agency for International Development. And basically in 1961, John Kennedy decided that we needed an agency that could deliver. Well, I like to say that what aid did was everything that we wanted to do to influence events overseas that didn't require a military response and was not something that just diplomats were going to accomplish by having meetings and writing cables. So originally, what they focused on was competing with the Soviet Union, because we wanted to deliver assistance to countries that were attracted to communism, and we wanted to provide some alternative. So we had programs in Africa and Latin America that were basically that we would negotiate with the host government, the local government, as to what do you think we could do here that would be useful for you. And I want to get one thing out of the way right away. Foreign aid, a lot of Americans thought foreign aid was a much bigger part of our budget than it ever was. It was always way below 1%. One year there were 2 airplanes that crashed in the United States. B-1 bomber went down in Dakota and one went down in Texas. Those 2 planes together exceeded all of the foreign aid that we gave to sub-Saharan Africa that year, by far. Foreign aid is a drop in the bucket compared to the efforts that the money we spend on the military, and it brings benefits to the U.S. But I'll get into that later. At first, it was to compete with communism, but then all kinds of things popped up afterwards. Then they got concerned about, Congress got worried about population growth. People thought the world was going to have too many people. They couldn't couldn't feed them. So we got involved in family planning programs in a lot of different places. And then they got worried about food production. We got involved in funding a lot of the research that created the green revolution that dramatically increased food production with new strains of rice and corn and that has I saw one statistic recently that every 2 weeks we make back in the form of profits by our own companies that sell seeds and fertilizer. We make back in 2 weeks all of the money we spent in the decade of the 1970s on the Green Revolution. That's just one example, but there's hundreds of others like that. Later on, when the Soviet Union broke apart, then they came to us and said, would you send people over there to teach them how to run a private economy? So we needed to train accountants and lawyers. We needed to help the legislators write commercial codes so that they could have a local stock market and change their laws and teach people about modern accounting and about capital markets. We created entire businesses down in Central America. We brought in a company once in Honduras to teach farmers how to grow onions up in the mountains, and we sent a container over to Miami just to see if it was something that we could sell in the U.S. at a time when we didn't have onions being harvested here. And 10 years later, 500,000 people are earning their living growing onions. And then we did that with snow peas in Guatemala. We did it with strawberries in Guatemala. We did it with melons, with cantaloupes, with shrimp farms, with flowers. Many, many businesses were created by AID that employed lots of people who might otherwise think about coming north. So we were, in a sense, it was an immigration program by basically building up the economies down there. But at the same time, it was trade with the U.S. So there were jobs here that were created at the same time. I could go on and on. When environmentalists in Central America were concerned about biodiversity in Central America, it was AID got the call. It said, what are you going to do about that? The animals can't run north and south because they're bumping into roads and borders and other things. And so we got the governments together to negotiate a system of contiguous national parks that runs from Mexico all the way down to Panama. That was something they wanted us to do when they were concerned about poaching in game parks in Africa. So we got involved in training game wardens and bringing some equipment there to better monitor combat poaching of elephants and rhinoceroses and whatnot. When Ebola broke out in Africa, it was AID. We got the job to go down there and provide protective suits and other equipment to the people so they could bury the bodies without spreading the virus elsewhere. Malaria work, HIV/AIDS work, tuberculosis work. And of course, we buy a lot of food from our farmers because there's a big food support, farmer support program. And then AID got the job of what are you going to do with all this food? And so when there was a famine or a disaster somewhere, and most of the press is about our humanitarian work and our disaster response, which no longer exists. We just don't have the part of the agency that used to do that. But we did so many other things. And that's why I called my first book Dilettante, because as a lawyer, I would get involved in whatever it was that management had a problem with that they didn't have a standard answer to. And I specialized in foreign aid law, which was, outside the agency is totally useless. I couldn't do it. It wouldn't be used anywhere else. But for me, it was a privilege to be able to be part of that effort to work on whatever the task was. And it spanned the whole spectrum of human activity, as I say, between military and between pure diplomacy. And there's no denying that there are things that need to be influenced overseas, but we don't have that tool anymore. We've got our embassies, and they can write cables and they can have all the meetings they want, but they're not going to bring contractors or grantees to the table, and they're not going to do the kinds of things that we did. And of course, most of the things you want to influence overseas are inappropriate for a military response. There's only so much the military can do. So we did everything in between. We don't do it anymore.
Yeah, for sure. So you already answered my question. Foreign aid work, you could provide specific example that works. So you already, and I was about to say, does it even increase our influence, our positive influence, instead of just, military response, just like, we're having like Iran, Venezuela, probably Cuba next, based on what's going on. No, you already answered that question really well. So I'm definitely not gonna ask that because you already answered too many good examples and very succinct and clear too, believe it or not. So we skip that one. So now let's get to the most probably emotional part. What was your reaction when Trump just gutted the whole thing because he thinks it was a waste. It was spreading wokeness and whatever other narrative he had.
I was outraged, totally outraged. He said that we were a criminal organization. I gave up 2/3 of my income to join the agency. Many of the people in the agency were former Peace Corps volunteers. They were very inspired, very dedicated, very humanitarian people. They were not in business to steal from the U.S. government. And even if they had been, that would have been impossible because there were so many eyeballs. We didn't dream up our programs by ourselves. What we did was what Congress asked us to do, what the White House asked us to do. Everything we did was approved by the Office of Management of Budget, by the congressional committees in both houses. The House of Representatives and the Senate had their foreign relations committees, their foreign appropriations committees. We had the White House, the OMB, the Congress, we had the GAO watching us, we had our own auditors, we had external auditors, and every single project we did had to have its own evaluation built into the budget so that it would get evaluated and audited. And we had 60 years worth of evaluations and data collected in the Center for Development Information and CDIE, they call it, Center for Development Information and Evaluation. Musk came in a matter of 2 weeks and basically sent out a stop work order worldwide that included everything, even the life-saving stuff that they claimed later. They lied about it and said, we are continuing the life-saving stuff. That's total bullshit. They stopped everything, and the contractors and the grantees let the people go. Okay, then they tried to figure out later, well, geez, Marco Rubio issued an exception. He said, you can keep the life-saving stuff alive. Well, it had already ended, and the people were gone. The commodities that were being shipped, nobody was there to clear them out of customs. It was a train wreck, big time train wreck. And there's a group out of Boston that's tracking the number of deaths that our programs would have prevented. And it's north of 700,000 now. This was manslaughter on a big scale. And it was done for reasons of political showmanship. And they just wanted to appeal to the base of the MAGA folks who may have thought that, we were spending far more than we did, who didn't appreciate what we were doing, and they didn't understand anything about it. They came in and they were blown away when they went down through the list and started talking to the career staff and realized one guy in one of the meetings, he said, geez, I thought all you did was finance abortions. And we never came close to that. We might have funded organizations who talked about it, but we certainly didn't touch it. But anyway, they didn't understand the first thing about USAID. And they fired everybody, except for a very small skeleton staff. They left 12 people for the entire continent of Africa. And that was just until the summer when even they were let go too. But, you can't keep life-saving programs alive in Africa with 12 people spread across a continent that's way bigger than the entire South American continent is. It was absurd what they did, frankly. And my reaction was to finish my stories. The first book I mentioned got me into Africa in 1989, but I had a lot more stories to tell. And so I wrapped them up in a book called Inside USAID, An Odyssey of Foreign Assistance, and that's available now. You can find it on Amazon and other places. If you Google Clifford Brown, though, you're going to be looking at a black trumpet player. He had my name. So that's why I'm now trying to use my middle initial in it. But I have a website, cliffordhbrown.com, and you can find the books there. That was my first reaction, to try and set the record straight. However, there's a better book out there. And it might be rare for you to be interviewing an author who starts talking about somebody else's book, but I only recently finished it. It's called Into the Wood Chipper. And it was written by a guy who happened to be in Canada on a ski vacation when they announced the stop work order. And he was not in Washington, D.C. Well, there were some payments that went out the door after that stop work order was issued. And Musk and his crew got pissed off about it and said, look, these civil servant people, they're conspiring to get around the executive order. So these payments are already going out the door. The problem was those payments had already been approved by everybody in USAID, and they were over at Treasury in their system. And yeah, they went out the door, and a lot of the contractors kept getting some of the money that was owed to them, but it wasn't aid that was doing it. Anyway, the Doge boys overreacted and fired everybody at the top. And this guy comes back and he finds himself, he was a mid-level guy in the Global Health Bureau. And then then he was told, you're in charge of the whole health program now. His name is Nicholas Enright. So he soon realized that they were asking him to dig his own grave and dig the agency's grave. So he kept very, very detailed records of what was going on during those first weeks right after the stop work order was issued, when they realized, oh, we better do something to try and keep the life-saving stuff alive. And he wrote a book that's a real indictment of what was going on at that point. They finally decided that as far as life-saving, what they meant was the infectious disease programs only. And then only if you could prove that somebody was going to die within the next 30 days. Like if you order medicine and it isn't going to come until day 32, well, that's obviously not going to stop anybody from dying in the next 30 days. So that doesn't count. So no, you can't buy that medicine. If it was feeding refugees in Sudan, no, that's somebody else's problem. We're not going to worry about that. That's not us saving lives. That should be the World Health Organization or somebody else. So they didn't do that. If it was child survival programs that would keep premature infants alive, sorry, that's not good enough. If it would help mothers who had hemorrhage during childbirth, sorry, that doesn't count. So all kinds of things that were saving lives, they just threw out immediately. And there is a small number of programs that they tried to revive, and they're over with the State Department now. But as I say, those are only the infectious disease programs, and most of the life-saving work. And of course, none of the other stuff I mentioned that was stuff we did because we felt it was going to benefit the U.S. None of that's going on anymore. So that book is a better story about what happened right after I wasn't in the agency when the stop work order. I had retired originally in 2009, so I told my stories in my own book, but that one tells the story of what happened right after the stop work order went out.
I appreciate your own plug-in and the other person's plug-in. That's all allowed in this podcast for sure. Listen, you want the people to know the truth and, just selling, advertising, free ad, I'm going to call it in quotes, of someone else's work that has them, a more, I'll say, first-hand account, if you will, of the recent structure of it. I mean, sure, I'm all for it. As long as it's relevant, then, that's not a big thing. If you want to talk about Easter Bunny and all that other stuff, I say, excuse me, we're not talking about the Easter Bunny, and that's not allowed on my podcast because I don't believe in that craziness. But anyways, so it's fine that you plug in someone else's work because it's relevant to what we are talking about, and that's all I really care about. Where it goes, I have no control of that, and. Yeah, I just thought it was very reckless how it's done. It was done quick, abrupt, and I'm not surprised what you have said that it will cause. I could imagine the logistics and the impact of that. Oh, we gotta just stop because president, especially just that Doge, which that was a disaster to no one's surprise who has a brain. It was so quick and abrupt, and they said it could have cut lots of savings. They didn't really do much. Really, they add more to the debt. What a disaster. I mean, this is not me having Trump derangement syndrome. You could put that in the comments all you want, but these are statistics. I was hoping they would succeed, but obviously they did not because the kind of leadership they got, and Elon Musk is very erratic. He's a smart man, don't get me wrong. But some of his tendencies gets very erratic and he overpromised and definitely underdeliver came to Doge. I'm not, Doge was a big part of that as well, trying to cut. But I think the USAID would improve our standing in the world stage. And it definitely influence because we're helping underprivileged people with certain, rather the motivation is selfish, promote America's image, whatever, that doesn't matter to me, but it was doing some good. It was doing good. And I just said, look, as long as it's helping people with life-saving diseases, I'm all for it. But if it's dumb stuff like, I don't know, I don't know if you could debunk this right away. If it's something like promoting wokeism, and I think they oversaid, like you said, abortions, that wasn't really a thing.
No, I can talk to you about
Yeah, go ahead.
areas that I thought it was sometimes kind of a hopeless quest. One was to persuade farmers not to grow coca, for instance, in Latin America. I was the deputy director in Colombia when we were doing Plan Colombia, which was at the time the third biggest aid program in the world, following Israel and Egypt, which they get their own checks. But we were spending a huge amount of money. A lot of it was going to the State Department and the mill group to kind of spray coca fields. They would bring in spray planes and kill the coca. Coca, there's several words in Spanish that get confused, but we were teaching farmers how to grow cacao, which is the big, large bean that they make chocolate out of, and in lieu of coca, which is a plant, a bushy plant that they can make cocaine out of. So, that was pretty hopeless to try and get farmers to. I mean, we did train a lot of farmers to grow chocolate plants, the cacao, but and there was a demand for it in some communities, particularly when the women in a community decided that, the criminal elements here are just too much and it's ruining our civic life. And they wanted their men to get out of the coca business and get into something that was legal and legitimate so they wouldn't have so many problems with lawlessness in general. So I won't say it never worked at all, but basically it was never going to be profitable nearly as profitable for those farmers as the coca is. Because when the coca dealers come in, they'll tell the farmers, listen, you don't have to buy the seeds or the fertilizer or the tools. We'll give it to you. And then we'll show up later and buy it from you. So you don't even have to market it. So, and you're going to make far more money dealing with us. And even if we do enter a community that's got effective law enforcement, those farmers, if they really want to make money, they'll just march off to the other side of the mountain, or they'll go into Venezuela or Brazil or somewhere else. And the jungle is too big to prevent that from happening. So the 30 years after I was there, Colombia is still the biggest cocaine producer in the world. And the same thing happened in Peru and in Bolivia. And I know it's going on now in Afghanistan and some of the countries over Pakistan, where we had anti-poppy growing programs to teach those farmers not to grow the raw product for heroin. So that was, I think, there were legitimate concerns that money was a futile effort and a waste of money. It wasn't the biggest part of our budget by any means, but there was a lot of money spent on it. And another one that sometimes was a waste was when we were promoting democracy. Now that's fine if the government wants it, but if you try to do that in a place like Nicaragua, which is run by a guy named Daniel Ortega now, they don't want it. And, you can spend all kinds of money trying to promote free speech and effective elections and training legislators and training judges and whatnot. But if they don't want it, forget it. It's not going to work. And in Russia, we had spent quite a bit doing that, and they didn't appreciate it, and they kicked us out. So, when we were trying to sell democracy to places who weren't interested in it, then that was a waste of money. And I get into that in my book. I talk about that, and I'm trying to sugarcoat it. There were places, but that's not to say that there wasn't a lot of pressure on our agency to do it. As I said before, we didn't invent these programs. We were told to do this stuff.
So you say you're directed by Congress to do these programs. I'm sure if you would have had your own, your own discretion and leadership, maybe you would have just said, no, we're not going to do this, but we'll continue this. I'm sure there'll be changes, but you are directed by Congress because that's what's allocated for. Look, once someone's paying you to do something, so you're the service provider and they're the customer. That's why you have some interesting things like trying to spread democracy in places that are not too receptive for democracy. They are fine with whatever government that they have. Yeah. So I'm not surprised that was a thing. I was just about to ask a little bit about that, but I'm happy that you beat me to it. I said, was there anything trying to promote democracy in the US? But there were countries that rejected it. I'm not sure the country that accepted it. That's not too interesting to me. You know what? I think we have time. I think you said before we record about your stories in Africa. Feel free to share them, to the viewer.
I lived in Nairobi for 3.5 years, but my job was regional. So I traveled all up and down the east side of Africa and got over to Kinshasa when it was still Zaire. Now it's called the DRC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And I got to some very beautiful places. Kampala, Uganda, believe it or not, was one of the prettiest places I had ever seen. The Brits had very good taste when they chose sites for their colonies, way better than the French on the other side of the continent. But, I went there when my kids were young. They enrolled in the International School of Kenya, and we were able to, when I wasn't traveling, we would get down. Sometimes we'd drive down to Mombasa. Sometimes we took the train, and I learned to scuba dive down in the Indian Ocean in Mombasa, and I studied Swahili when I was there. One Christmas, we drove from Nairobi over to Kampala and visited some friends of ours because Foreign Service people are always moving around, so quite often you make friends with people in one post, and then they get assigned to the country next door. The life in Nairobi was, for me, it was very colonial, although toward the end of my tour, there were a lot of unemployed soldiers from some civil wars that had ended. There was one in Somalia that ended. There was a civil war in Sudan that had ended, and then there were some rebels that had been fighting in the eastern part of Zaire. And Rwanda, this was before Rwanda exploded and they had the big massacres, and when the Hutus and the Tutsis went after each other. Kigali, Rwanda was another very pretty city when I visited, very clean, and they were speaking French then. Nowadays, they decided they were going to switch to English in the government. There's a lot I could tell you about. We were working on the anti-apartheid movement, supporting the NGOs in South Africa that were fighting to end apartheid. That's where the minority white society was ruling a country that was predominantly Black Africans, and it succeeded. And that possibly is some of the motive that Elon Musk may have had, some of the grudge that he displayed against USAID. I doubt that he's ever really visited a USAID project, but he did grow up in South Africa as a white person when we were supporting the Black civil society that was fighting to end the apartheid system, and they succeeded. And I'm personal friends with the guy that was the mission director who met Nelson Mandela when he got out of jail. And I'm just speculating that maybe that's why he didn't think much of USAID, but he was quite happy to feed it into the wood chipper. Those are his words. That one Monday he bragged that he had spent the weekend feeding USAID into the wood chipper. And he meant all of it. He didn't mean all except the life-saving stuff. He meant all of it, and he was quite happy he had done it. But, I can't get into all the travels and all other things I did. I was on the road probably 30% of the time when I was there. I got to Madagascar. There's more countries I went to than I didn't go to. And when you include, I started my career in Africa, and then I ended it on the other side. I was the mission director by then. I had moved into management. And I was the mission director in Guinea and Sierra Leone. And that was a fascinating contrast between, the Africa on the east side is they're more reserved. They're not as colorful. On the west side, they just, I don't know. I apologize to any Kenyans who are listening to this, if any, but on the west side, they seem more colorful and more outgoing and friendly, and they're just more reserved over on the eastern side. So that was a study in contrast. But I got to Liberia, to Ghana, to Bamako in Mali, to Dakar in Senegal, Freetown. We were responsible. My mission was responsible for Freetown and Guinea. The enduring fact that I've come away with from my time over there is that there again it involves the drug business. If a single Cessna flies over from Brazil and lands in, say, Guinea-Bissau, that one little airplane has more value on it in terms of illegal drugs they're going to sell up into Europe. The value of what they've got on board that plane exceeds the entire national budget for the military and the police combined. So it's not a surprise that they bought off many of the senior level law enforcement and military folks in the small countries in West Africa, and there's a lot of them. The Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, Freetown, or Sierra Leone, Liberia. That's the whole western side of Africa is dominated by bribery and corruption derived from the drug trade. But the problem isn't teaching the farmers to grow something. The problem is up north and cutting the demand. So if there wasn't such a big demand for it up in Europe, you wouldn't have that problem. But it's a pretty lawless area, frankly. And also the borders there don't make any sense because they were just drawn by Europeans with no reference to the tribal differences and whatnot. So corruption is just understood and accepted by those societies that it's a shame.
Man, that is a shame indeed. It will take some understanding and communication. Maybe I'll strain some of that up, and that's why I think, yep, that's why the borders are not well respected. Just like you said, they just drew it. Just no, this is what we think it's best, and you tribal idiots, yeah, deal with it.
Yeah.
Take it or leave it. Yep. So yeah, I'm not trying to laugh at it, but it's sad. It's very, very, very sad indeed. Maybe some of those conflicts would have been prevented. Not all, but definitely some. Yeah. So now let me put on the skeptical lens. So sure, some people who are skeptical. I still believe in the narrative that, you said is a complete waste of money, or people just don't understand what the heck it is. How do you address those people who don't understand what you said is, and what's a common misconception?
Well, foreign aid, it's a fairly new historical phenomenon. I mean, it until there you can find a few examples of it that predate the 20th century, but the biggest example, there was a famine in the 1920s when we saved a lot of lives in Soviet Russia. But after World War II, we helped rebuild Europe, and we also helped rebuild Japan, and the whole world is safer and more prosperous because of what we did. That was foreign aid, big time foreign aid in both Europe and Japan, and it helped us because it made the whole world a safer, richer, more developed place. What people don't get about foreign aid is that we do it, as I said before, to influence events overseas. And if you think that the events overseas don't impact us, then you're living under a rock. I mean, the epidemics don't respect national borders. You need to affect events overseas, and you benefit when you enhance the level of the living standards in your neighbors, because every religion in the world will tell you that the giver benefits as much as the recipient. And there's a reason for that. There was an old Chinese philosopher named Mencius once who said that he thinks there's some goodness in everyone, and his evidence was that there are very few adults, if any, that if they see a child sitting on the edge of a well and that child is about to fall in, they don't have a natural urge to run over there and try and save that child. Well, in a way, foreign aid is a reflection of that same urge. And it's better for everyone that we act on that urge and not fight it. So the idea that we're just wasting our money is nonsense. It's not a waste to help your neighbors. And this country was founded on an ideal that all people were all men. It said all men, but they should have meant all people are created equal. It doesn't say unless you were born over there. It's I'm not suggesting we throw open the borders, but the idea that we're wasting our money by helping our neighbors is spiritually in the Stone Age, as far as I'm concerned. We are helping ourselves when we help our neighbors.
Well said. I mean, the way I see it, that's diplomatic power, right? Because, instead of the hard military power that sadly we're over relying on, and the impact is not so great, especially Iran. Iran's the chief example so far. Yeah. I don't know if you said would have made a difference there, maybe not, but it's better than this military response, at least in my opinion. I think it was unnecessary, but that's just my opinion. I'm sure gonna get people to come and say, "You don't know, or try to prevent the nuclear weapons." Blah, 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 blah.
Well, there
Yeah.
are other ways to save money. What the tragedy of USAID's destruction was not only did the U.S. lose its main mechanism to affect events overseas, other than military or pure diplomacy, as I said, but it's also just a tragedy that all these dedicated people had lost their careers. There's tens of thousands of people that have been very high spirited, very, very committed to this work, and they're all on the street. I mean, they're looking for work now, and there aren't jobs in that area anymore. Of course, there are other donors that foreign aid, the impulse that I mentioned is still out there, but it's in the private sector. There are private charities that are still active, and there's other donors from other countries that are still active. But we had the biggest impact. We had the most people overseas, and we just don't have them anymore. So I hope that when this administration passes from the scene, if and when that happens, that we can revive the agency, because it did a lot of good for us and them. It wasn't just generosity, it was self-interest in many cases.
Oh, yeah, for sure. This is why I tell a lot of your listener viewers, if you think everything's just generosity, like you're pretty naive. I wish I had that mentality, but that's been shattered since I'm gonna say as young as 9 or 10 years old. I see how people work, and I started picking that up. So there's something for something, and I've seen that interaction a lot, transactional. I know that probably made me a little more cynical sometimes. Yeah, you're not wrong there. I'm not gonna defend that, but hey, I mean, it helped me gain a better understanding how humans function. Like I said, I think it was a definitely a positive. I agree with that. Sure, we could definitely do some cuts on the military. I think all that middle people contract, that's a big waste right there that we could have made tremendous economic savings, but that's not going to happen. At least not anytime soon. That's not going to happen. That's where I can see some fraud and waste. I'm not against military. Military has its uses, but I just think the middle people and the budget's a bit too bloated, in my opinion. That's just my opinion of that. And you said the U.S. You said was a crumb, like a breadcrumb, a part of the big budget. Like military is like a big chunk of it for sure. And all, and we just cut something that was we just cut breadcrumbs at best, not half of a bread or 1/3 of a bread. We just cut breadcrumbs. That's all Doge did. We just shaved the surface.
Yeah.
That's the most we ever did. And now, and of course, ironic, and to no one's surprise, the debt just continues to skyrocket at this rate.
As a former commercial bankruptcy lawyer, we created a lot of claims against the U.S. government. Those claims are going to get paid at some point. But when you roll back, if you have a big program, if you really are serious about ending it, you need to do it in an orderly fashion. But just to issue a stop work order and say everybody's done, do nothing for the next. They didn't even say how long their review was going to take. They might have said, put everything on hold for 30 days, 40 days, 45, 90 days. They didn't say anything. They gave no time frame at all. They said, stop work. So, of course, the contractors and the grantees, they had to let everybody go. They couldn't just say, okay, stay on the payroll. We might be able to pay you a month from now or 2 months from now. They let them go. And they're out there on the street. So the claims are out there. And then the commodities, of course, that just got lost or didn't get cleared through customs and they got destroyed. Vendors who didn't get paid. Those claims are working their way through the court system and they'll get paid, but it might eventually save some money if we never start doing it again. But in the meantime, what it did was bump up the claims dramatically. So
I mean, companies were so in trouble with tariffs.
right.
They won their case. Yeah, now U.S. Of course, the contractors owe them. Yep. I mean, fight in the courts. It's gonna be a long, tedious battle, but I think you have a good case, I would say.
Yeah.
Based on that abrupt stop that just caused so much, caused a domino effect of this.
I mentioned to you before we started recording that I have a bit of a following in Africa now, partly because I talk about the border issues and how illogical they were. But in my old age, I've come to the conclusion now that the nation state, the very concept of a nation state it's simply a habit now that the world does not really seriously examine as a habit. When the U.S. was first breaking away from Britain, Thomas Paine wrote a pamphlet called Common Sense. And in there, he said, monarchy has just become a habit. There was nothing divine about the rights of kings and monarchs. It's just a habit the world got used to. Well, I feel that way about national borders themselves. And I cite this example. One man started the war in Ukraine. One man, maybe two if you count Israel, but one man started the war in Iran. And one man may start a war in Taiwan at some point. And the reason one man in each such example is able to do that is because of these large national borders that surround a very large economy. And that enables a very large military that only exists. Well, they've got a military, so we got to have one too. But when you have that much of an economy supporting that big of a military that is controlled and responsive to a single person in a world with over 9 billion, well, getting up to 9 billion, the idea that three guys have that kind of power is insane to me. And I think we need to re-examine the whole concept of the nation state. And I'm not the first person to say it, although I can understand why some people might ask what I've been smoking. Angela Merkel made the same comment. The nation state itself needs to be re-examined. If we had a system more like Switzerland, where every little canton in Switzerland, believe it or not, each canton can decide if you can become a Swiss citizen. They make their own rules. The whole country doesn't make its rule for Swiss citizenship. Each canton does. Then you wouldn't have these gigantic militaries that could be directed in a certain direction. And maybe you wouldn't even need foreign aid at that point because people could go to where the jobs are and the income disparities would even out. But that's a different discussion.
If you're interested in return, we could talk about the concept of nation state. Why is an obsolete idea and what is a potential replacement? I mean, not too long ago, which this episode is going to be released a little after this one about why one world government is a good idea. So I don't know that, I'm willing to, to entertain these ideas because let's just say, change is going to happen one way or another. I don't know if it's good change or bad change. So that some time will tell for sure. Time will tell, and impacts will definitely show itself at some point. But people are afraid of that for sure. A nation state and one world government. So we'll see. We'll see. But people in the comments, what do you think of the nation state? You think it's a obsolete idea or it's a fine and dandy idea? Hey, you always got their opinions. So put it in the comments section. Put it in the comments if you think it's a good idea or a bad idea. And I want to hear a good reason. I don't want to hear Clifford's stupid. That's not an argument. And I reject that argument. I'll ignore that. And people ignore that too. Or Elias is insane for entertaining these ideas. No, we should talk about them. No. Just because you think it's crazy, that's your problem. No, let's talk about it. We're grown up, right? Or unless you're mentally a child, then get out of this podcast. I don't want kids. Even though you could be physically 30 years old, if your mind is like a 5-year-old, I don't want you either. Out. This is not for you. This is an adult podcast. This is not a safe space. So I'm going to entertain ideas that the left likes, or the right likes, or the center likes, or nobody likes, or some that most people like, which is rare. This is not a safe space, and I don't want it to be a safe space. No, I don't believe in safe spaces. I would say that even more than the so-called MAGA people. I said, oh, I'm anti-safe space. Oh, please, you got your safe space. That Katie Miller's podcast, for example, is a good safe space for MAGA. And then for the left, you got Sateo. Come on, give me a break. You got your safe spaces, all right? This is not a safe space. I'm a centrist. If you convince me that your idea is good, I'm willing to entertain it and even accept it. And I'm just give you a personal example. I was skeptical of Zoran Mondani, but so far he's doing better than I thought. And this is coming from a moderate. I know he's DSA, he's definitely leans to the left, but some of the things that he's doing better than I thought. That's my pressure. I was very skeptical of him too. I was a little concerned, but you know what? So far, he's not so bad. I know you people got your opinions. You can put them down in the comment section too. You think Zoran is great, or you think he's evil? Comment section activity right there. That's another thing you can do right there. So express your opinions, express them. That's what I want to say about that. Before I wrap this up, is there anything else you want to add before I end this?
No, Elias, I've enjoyed our talk. I'd be happy to return. There's a lot of other subjects I could have gotten into: sex trafficking in Africa, body parts trafficking, bride kidnapping in Central Asia. I was exposed to a lot of pretty strange and weird phenomenon in my days in USAID. It was 27 years, and I can't summarize it in 1 hour. So
Oh no, for sure.
carry the conversation further, I'd be happy to be a guest. So thank you.
Oh yeah, no problem. Yeah, I was just more interested in USAID because I think people need to be educated on that. Because like I said, I only had like a basic surface level understanding of it. I'm happy I got a better understanding of it, and I hope you did too, listeners and viewers. I really hope you did as well. I hope you got something out of it. That's all I'm going to say. So, what's my call to action? Check out Mr. Clifford H. Brown. I'm going to put the link for his website and all his social medias. And, for those who only have a LinkedIn, those are pure professionals. But if you have all your social medias, I consider you a risky professional because you might get into spaces where some people have low common denominator thinking that's just gonna bash you just because they're having a bad day. Nothing else. Just because they're having a bad day and they heard something that they just simply didn't like, and that's where it ends in logic. Oh, just because I didn't like it. Challenge it on its logic. Challenge, use evidence. Be a grown up. Stop being a big baby. Okay. Like I said, I'm here for challenges. I don't want yes people either because that's boring. All right. So again, check his website, and I'm going to put the link to the elbow into the wood chipper. That link of the book is going to go there as well. But of course, Clifford Brown goes on the top because he's the guest. That one's just some other guy. He just gets second billing at best. And that's going to be there. And of course, my stuff will be in the bottom because you already know me and all that. And I'm confident you touched some of the free stuff that I got right there. So now let's really wrap this up. Rate this podcast If you put 1 to 4 stars, give one specific way this podcast can improve. Not just Elias is great or Elias is a dumb. That doesn't help. Empty compliments and insults don't help. Give one specific way this podcast can improve. If it's a 5-star, what should I keep doing? Or you could bend the rules a little bit. I think you did great here, but you can improve on that. I could be flexible there too. Give specific and accurate criticisms. I'm receptive to it as well. Okay. I have thick skin both figuratively and literally. So, I don't get offended easily. Trust me, I got name called and all that, and I just brush it off because at the end of the day, it's just someone on the internet. I go out there and touch grass. I don't even think about it. It's as easy as that, people. Okay. And I'm sure the older generations, they already been mastered that because this development came in much later. Me, I wasn't transitioning from a kid to a teenager. So I was last touch grass and then teenager the computers took over. And then now we got smartphones. What we're going to have next? Holograms, flying cars, whatever the heck. Well, who the heck knows? Or we definitely have more robots in our house. I mean, but even though they've been a hilarious fail, the cleaning maid, one of them, that robot just caused so much chaos. So we are not ready for that. So we are progressing, but just, slower and some things. AI is evolving fast. That's one thing I'll say is evolving fast, but not robotics. Robotics is going to take some time, for sure. So again, just give a rating, and you could. I normally used to say just only do an Apple podcast. Do it at Spotify as well. I'm more open to that now. And then you, of course, follow me on Buzzsprout and YouTube and Facebook. And then I'm gonna create the Instagram page probably by the end of this year. It's only for short form content only. No long form content is going there. And I'm gonna do the same thing with Facebook as. So it's gonna be for posts and short form content. Okay. So that's all I got for you. So whenever you listen and completed this episode, you have a blessed day, afternoon, or night.